Kicking off. So in Module 6, as John just suggested, we're discussing lease management and portfolio optimisation. And first up, it's always nice to start off with a quote, which is John's penchant. The whole is only as good as the sum of the parts. Now, I'm sure you've heard that 1,000 times. So what do we mean by this? We are saying that a property portfolio can have good parts, but a bad whole. Or more specifically, the individual or the micro elements, the leases, may be well negotiated and structured, but this alone may not aid or benefit or even be aligned with the overall, the macro objectives of the business. This module explores how that is possible. Next slide, please. So following on from the previous slide, it is possible to negotiate favourable leases, but not to have a portfolio that is optimised. Portfolio optimisation requires effective lease management with ongoing diligent portfolio optimisation. The need for effective lease management can be best illustrated by a couple of real-world examples of the implications of untidy lease management. So, a major organisation who I'll call Tenant T, T for tardy, had a major, let's say, mining operation in Western Australia. The company had leased the site 21 years ago on very favourable terms and had developed major capital-intensive facilities on the land. Tenant T managed its property portfolio on a regional basis. It had no supporting systems, and property decisions were taken independently by local management. There was no property expertise in-house. Unfortunately, it missed the opportunity to exercise its option to renew for a further term. The owner of the land seized the opportunity and offered the site to a competitor. The competitor, in turn, naturally, took the opportunity, and the incumbent tenant T was given 30 days' notice. To combat issues, the tenant was so disbelieving it just didn't remove its improvements within the time frame, which at law and under the lease became the landlord's properties. There was a series of failed legal attempts, but fast forward a few months, the landlord took possession of the land together with the improvements. The incoming competitor said, "Thank you very much," and started operating. Now, this is an extreme case and a very disastrous case, and perhaps even a perfect storm scenario, but it does demonstrate the potential for significant operational, financial, and indeed reputational damage. Ken?
Thanks, Michael. Look, another example of what I might use is PAS Group, who some of you may have been aware or have seen in the recent media reports that they've actually gone into administration. So they are actually a national clothing retailer with stores in the likes of Westfields, the vicinity and shopping centres. So look, with that group in particular, whilst they had actually very strong leases on foot, without optimising their portfolio, they did not have a pandemic provision in their lease. And as a result of that, they've actually had to call it administration. So look, if they did have such clause in the lease, they could have actually avoided this issue. Another example I'll use is another client of Lpc's. So across their portfolio, they actually have quite a favourable rate per square metre, but the existing footprint in terms of the size of the premises does not work for the future business requirements. And like what the objectives for us from a portfolio point of view is to try and improve those opportunities and reduce those gaps as part of their objectives. Cool. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Ken. Look, another example, just quickly, of the impacts of not having a portfolio optimisation perspective is a large industrial client of ours, which manufactures, I'll say, widgets. It has a large portfolio that it's owned since Adam was a boy, including a significant number of large parcels of land that were either being underutilised or just not even being used at all. This, coupled with the fact that the company was underperforming, led to it having a really weak balance sheet with large amounts of capital held in underperforming assets. What it was overlooking was the opportunity to potentially reposition some of those assets through rezonings or DAs, or just in some way repositioning to make it more attractive to the marketplace, and then subsequently selling that site to free up cash, which then can be redirected into core business activities. Or even more simply, look for opportunities to lease or in some other way part with the land to a third party to make better use of those assets, so they're at least returning some investment, some return on the investment. So I guess the moral of the story is not to rest on your laurels. Businesses evolve, circumstances change, and the property portfolio needs to respond accordingly. Therefore, it's essential that an occupier of a property, particularly a tenant, understand the importance of, firstly, the problem that tidy lease management and portfolio optimisation solves, the fundamentals of tidy lease management in today's world, and the principles of portfolio optimisation and the best use of capital and space. And that's the objectives of this session today. Next slide. And Ken.
Thanks, Michael. Look, what we might do, we might run a poll now. So the question is, does your lease portfolio match your business needs? And assume that you actually manage a lease portfolio of 50 leases. Look, we'll give everyone a couple of minutes.
Ken, just in the last one, we had a question about the scrolling and when we were looking at the results. This one, it doesn't apply because there's only 3 questions. So I don't think scrolling. Oh no, there's 4.
I think there's 4 questions. Yeah.
So just to say that each user, you have a scroll function on your screen. So we can't control the scrolling centrally. You scroll yourself, both on the questions and on the display, or you should have that functionality. Thanks, Ken.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, John. We'll give it 10 more seconds.
You need a little bit more time, Ken, I think. It takes, people got to read questions, I think.
But not all as quick as you, Ken.
Thanks, Michael.
Okay, Ken, we're 50% of the way.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Nils.
Number of the beast. That's probably it.
Once again, as always, the questions have got a little bit of a twist in them. And so they don't really lend themselves to true or false, but it makes one think.
Yeah, cool. All right.
Here we go.
Cool. Thanks, John. Thanks, Nils. What I might do, I'll share the results. Now, so just starting off with the first question, to optimize a portfolio, one needs a mix of freehold, lease, license, and co-working premises. Look, so the answer for this one could be true. So with portfolio optimization, you could have a combination of lease, license. So the idea is focusing on the word portfolio to have a portfolio of properties within the portfolio.
I think, you know, one way to emphasize that is that it will vary from business to business. If you're a manufacturing business, let's say, you may have core assets which you've invested a huge amount of capital in plant and equipment. Obviously, you want to be able to protect that and have security of tenure. Best way to do that, arguably, is freehold. So you might want to have those key manufacturing facilities held under freehold. Whereas your corporate office, where you know the ivory tower, where all the shiny bums sit, you might want to have a little bit more flexibility. Or alternatively, you may be having a major project, but let's say you're bidding on an upcoming government opportunity and you need to pull together a project team in which you've got consultants and advisors and all that sort of thing, and you don't have enough office space in your corporate office, and you might want to just take some project space for the time being whilst you prepare that bid. Co-working space is a great opportunity for that.
Cool. Thanks, Michael. The second question, lease management results in portfolio optimization. Look, so the answer is it is true. It does actually form part of the overall optimization. Without the management of leases, you can't get to the outcome. But the idea is with the solution is actually the optimization piece is actually knowing what to look out for and when to look out for it.
Can I comment just one comment on that? Is it's sort of a trick question. And so what the way I would phrase it is that lease management is a pre-qualifier
Yep.
to portfolio optimization, but it's not the same. It enables you to have the data in the right order. Julian mentioned it earlier, to have the appropriate management process which extracts value from the overall portfolio. So you could have a reasonable lease management process taking place, but without optimizing the portfolio. Portfolio optimization, as Michael said, keeps the focus on the business objectives the whole time.
Yeah. And I think similarly, the next question, lease administration is different to lease management, but it's possibly better described as being a component of lease management. Lease administration suggests that it's down the hierarchy of vigilance, whereas lease management is a more holistic approach.
Cool. Thanks, Michael. And just for the fourth question, if you negotiate the best rental terms for each of your 50 leases, you will optimize the portfolio. Look, our view of that, our question is false. Just going back to the example, the case study that we actually used in the earlier slide, for one of our clients who had actually quite favourable rental rates across their portfolio. Whilst the lease rate was actually quite attractive in terms of the actual size and the utilisation, it actually didn't align with the business objective. So in effect, whilst one part of the portfolio was being optimised, the other part wasn't. All right, thanks, guys. So what we'll do, we'll move on, unless anyone has any questions, we'll just move on to the next slide. Yep, okay. So the next slide touches on what problems does lease management address. So at Lpc Cresa, we've actually identified the 5 common nevers from a portfolio optimization view. So starting off with the first one, never agree to a bad lease. An example of this could be a business entering into a new 5-year lease and undertaking a brand new fit out, whilst there is a demolition clause within the lease, and the landlord has the right to terminate by providing 6 months notice. Look, in our view, that is actually a very bad lease, as the guaranteed tenure is only 6 months. And the business has expended all this capital on building a brand new fit out. The next one, never miss a critical date. So this relates to any option terms, expansion rights, lease expiration date. I get the critical point of this one. If you do miss a date, there could be a significant financial impact on the business. If you have regard to a market rent review, or the business could actually be left on the street. Never pay too much. This is actually quite self-explanatory, but it relates to any costs associated with the lease with regard to the rental costs to ensure that the rent is in accordance with market, and the outgoings costs or the operating costs, even cleaning costs. It is actually what has been agreed or documented within the lease, and the landlord is actually not overcharging you for any additional costs that doesn't apply under the lease. The next one is never miss an opportunity. Look, this could relate to an example of this is in the current COVID environment. So a lot of our clients that actually have lease expiration dates that are coming up in the next 2 years. Given the downturn in the market, there is definitely an opportunity now to undertake a restructure and bring forward any potential savings that the business can achieve during this market. And the last one, never be IFRS 16 non-compliant. So this relates to any reporting requirements for a corporation that they have to abide by to comply with the international accounting standards. Look, what I might do, I'll throw it back to the attendees. Does anyone have any examples of either missing a critical date or entering into a bad lease, or even paying too much?
Surely we all have had one.
Yep.
None that anyone's going to admit.
I should rephrase that question. Does anyone have a friend that's actually entered into a bad lease?
Well, look, I must confess that that first example I gave you was a friend of mine. It was.
So what was your question, Ken? Just say the question again.
Sorry, the question was: does any of the attendees, or does any of the attendees have a friend who've actually entered into a bad lease, missed the date, or even missed an opportunity, or if they've actually overpaid within the lease?
We could give you a couple, and I'm just waiting for others. Please just unmute yourself and answer. We'll be watching that. But I'll give you one where a client of ours, where the client acquired another company. So they were a long-standing client, but the acquired company was not a client of ours that came into the fold. And they'd been in discussions for mergers for 2 years. And we're culminating those discussions, and the mergee, or rather the company being acquired, is that somebody went along and entered a new head office lease about 4 months before the commencement date, and they were stuck with their head office lease, which from memory I think was either 7 or 8 years plus options, with no use for the facility. So pretty serious error.
Well, there's got to be multiple situations. Perhaps we move on, Ken.
Yeah, cool. Look, the next slide, we'll just touch on a couple of case studies. Look, we won't spend too much time on it. But I guess, again, addressing the issues, what problems does lease management address? So just starting off with the first one in terms of missing a critical date. So I think John might have mentioned, I suspect this case study also relates to the same client in terms of a merger. Look, through our abstraction process of the business that our client was acquiring, it was identified that they actually missed a key date for one of their critical sites. And look, with that oversight, we were actually able to identify during the implementation process, and that just provided confidence in our client that the leases were actually being not overlooked.
Thanks, Ken. I'll touch on the next one. Never pay too much. Lpc has a national portfolio client with 7 sites around Australia. It had previously and faithfully been paying outgoings it was charged by the landlord. Upon review, though, we recognised that despite the fact that under the lease, the tenant was responsible for the landlord's on-site management office costs, we actually undertook a practical investigation, and we discovered that the landlord's on-site management office was being used for several other offices around the city. So with that in mind, we were able to negotiate that the on-site costs be prorated to just reflect that it was the management costs associated with that one building. Furthermore, we negotiated that the prorated amount be retrospective. Obviously, a nice little windfall for our client, but furthermore, it demonstrates the importance of reviewing, understanding, and the need for ongoing monitoring of outgoings. Ken?
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Michael. And just finishing off the last case study, never miss an opportunity. So through our portfolio optimization process, we actually conduct weekly, monthly, or even quarterly meetings with our client just to make sure they're on top of their portfolio. And look, and through one of those management meetings, it was actually identified that the client actually had too much space. And there was an opportunity for the client to actually sublease the space in a tight market and make a profit rent. Look, as a result of that, the client did actually make a profit rent and recover in excess of 100%, given that it was there wasn't much space in the market, and there was an opportunity for them to downsize in space that was sufficient for their business needs.
Thanks, Ken. Look, I might just add another one. It's a very quick case study of a missed opportunity, and it's a very recent one. We'll get to this a bit later on, but with our portfolio clients, we have monthly what we call health checks or portfolio meetings, at which senior management are invited. At this particular one, we had the CFO sitting in, and just in passing, he mentioned, oh, you know, the council rates bill for that particular property is very high. And I paused and I said, you're a non-for-profit. And he said, correct, yes. And I said, well, non-for-profits will typically be granted a council rate exemption or a rebate, depending on which jurisdiction you sit. You looked blankly. I could hear the crickets in the background. And I said, leave it with me. We'll have a look at that. The outcome is that for the past however long, they've missed the opportunity on rebates and exemptions of council rates. We have just gone through the process, and it's a return of about, or a saving of about $95,000 per annum.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Michael. That's certainly a good example.
Yeah. So next slide, please. Okay, now we're just going to provide you with an overview of the mismanagement problems, and we'll reflect upon the 5 nevers. Our lease management and portfolio optimisation solution is response to the undesired but all too common outcomes experienced by many tenants with multi-site portfolios. And furthermore, the need to ensure that leasing commitments and premises commitments support the business objectives into the future. As a result of that, we've identified the 5 nevers, which we touched upon earlier. This slide identifies the 5 problems, our solution being the middle column, and the outcome it provides being the final column. Never enter into a bad lease. It sounds obvious, but it can be a trap. Lease negotiation is a specialised skill and should be undertaken by professionals with a deep understanding of the market, recent transactions, commercial arrangements that are prevalent in the marketplace, incentives, etc., etc. Excuse me, all of which maximise the tenant's leverage. Never miss a critical date. I think my earlier example of tenant T, which is a real-life case study, illustrates an extreme case. But regardless of whether you can recover from a missed date, it will always add to the stress levels, management time, and puts the tenant in a position of disadvantage. So in order to respond, you must have alarms and alerts. And as Jeffrey pointed out last week, the alarms and alerts must be early enough to provide you with sufficient time to fully consider your options. This will maximise the tenant's protection and ensure security of tenure. Never overpay. This is an ongoing process. You must ensure the initial effective rent and outgoings are market-based and incentives are fully realised. However, the same rigour must be applied throughout the lease term and beyond. Rent reviews and outgoing increases must be critically examined and analysed, and our case study earlier illustrates the merits of that approach. And of course, never overpay upon vacating your premises. Understand your make good requirements, and then still negotiate. Having access to timely, accurate data in these situations will maximise the tenant's savings. Never miss an opportunity. Throughout the life cycle of a lease, there will be a number of opportunities for leverage, and we'll touch on these a bit later on. The current pandemic has presented an obvious one. Landlords are nervous about the future and are concerned about their occupancy rates, which present an opportunity for tenants to be on the front foot in terms of restriking their lease covenants and terms. Similarly, lease renewals will present an opportunity for lease restructures. Ongoing and diligent management of the portfolio will ensure you know the right time to maximise your tenant's advantage. Never be IFRS 16 non-compliant. As you're probably aware, the recent changes to the international accounting standards have ordered the way in which leases must be treated and must now be recorded on the balance sheet. In order to do so, very, very accurate data must be recorded in order to generate the correct and appropriate accounting journals. It's really not as simple as it sounds. Lpc Cresa has the software support systems to calculate the entries required, as do many other systems, of course. And regardless of the system you use, having accurate and correct accounting journals will ensure tenant compliance. Next slide, please. So this slide summarises the various phases of our lease and portfolio management solution. And it's nicely presented in the circular nature of it in the diagram on the slide in front of you. Phase 1 is the establishment phase, in which we extract, analyse and enter data into our database. It is set up to prevent risks into the future and to identify opportunities for the existing. Once it is complete, it will provide the one source of truth. Phase 2 is the portfolio management phase, which is the operational phase. It is a disciplined approach to monthly reporting and meetings in order to provide management with assurance that the portfolio is being optimised and the 5 nevers never occur. And phase 3 is the execution of transactions. These are pre-planned into the future as part of the extraction phase and aligned with a predefined project plans and scopes within our support systems project function. Next slide, and over to you, Ken.
Well, thanks, Michael. As Michael touched on, look, we're going to dive a little bit deeper. So just part 1, item 1 of the solution and the impact of the OCR. So for those of you who are not familiar with the term OCR, it relates to the occupancy cost ratio. Look, probably typically more applies in the retail environment where the gross revenue is actually benchmarked against the rental cost. But look, these are some of the key measures that some companies actually use to measure the performance of the lease and the impact on the business. So the outcomes of the database or the establishment phase 1 is just to ensure that all the data and the records are current, complete and accurate and are accessible to our clients also. I think Michael touched on before, just to ensure that all the alarms and alerts and the financial information are captured within the system, and it actually has direct oversight to ensure no key dates are missed. The financial data is actually captured in a form that is compliant with the journal entries and IRS 16, and it also includes any CapEx budgets, make good costs, and any operating budgets that need to be accounted for any future events. The audit status for each report is provided to our clients with any recommendations and addresses any key risks or any opportunities throughout the term of the leases. And what we also try and ensure also is to ensure there are a set of clauses that can be used to better protect the interest of the clients for any future leasing arrangements.
Thanks, Ken. I'm just going to have a quick chat about the multiple dots that appear on your screen in front of you. What it's illustrating is the level of rigour that is applied to the abstraction process. Each lease is reviewed and recorded clause by clause, and we'll rate the appropriateness of the clause against the predetermined suite of standard clauses we consider to be most appropriate for the client's business. We'll talk more about that later on. We use the traffic light system. Green will suggest that the clause is good and acceptable, and amber is okay, and red is not tenant friendly, it's not appropriate for the client's business, or simply just unacceptable. This allows us to focus our minds on which clauses present problems, or perhaps even opportunities to the client, and also, perhaps and more importantly, which clauses need to be challenged and restruck when the next opportunity for a restructure presents itself. So that is an actual portfolio that we recently abstracted data from. We predetermined which clauses were most significant given the nature of their operations, and we rated them on the traffic light system just to give us a visual graphic of where we need to focus our attention on that individual lease. Next slide.
May
Yes.
I make just a comment there, if I may?
Yes.
Just go back.
Yes, John.
If I can just draw on some of the previous modules, a couple of themes that we've highlighted. One has been starting with the end in mind.
Mm-hmm.
I think that in this little snippet picture, this traffic light picture, which Michael has explained very well, that's a replication that represents starting in the end in mind. Bear in mind, Michael and Ken have been speaking about phase 1 here, the establishment and maintain the cloud database. And so the first thing for us, and I know that the words are very small there, so just to say down the vertical axis, column A effectively, is the name of sites, and then the other side is in fact the terms within a lease. That's what those are. And so this creates, this gives a picture of what's the status of the lease portfolio in relation to the end in mind. Now, I think Michael's going to pick up on this, but just in case it doesn't get picked on later, Michael made the point as well, is that that suite of clauses that work is considered in the light of that particular business. That's very important. And so, for example, with a not-for-profit running government programs, then you would be, then, for example, flexibility of the term, whether programs are 1 year or 2 year and you have uncertainty into the future. Flexibility is greater in importance. So I'm just making the point that end in mind, and you look at the particular business or sub-businesses within the client portfolio. Thank you.
Absolutely. Next slide, Ken. Oh, yes, sorry, it is me. Okay, this is phase 2, the operational phase. It is the source of effective oversight and getting and keeping the data right and accessible. Our establishment phase obviously, as we just suggested, gets the data right and sets up the alarms and the alerts that drive the right actions at the right time. But there's also our administration approach that ensures the data stays right. Furthermore, the configuration of our software ensures that the scope and method and timing of every transaction is predetermined. Ken will now dig a little deeper and explain the monthly report that you see on our screen.
Yeah, cool. So the picture you actually see is actually a summary that we actually present to all our clients in our monthly or in our management reports. So the idea is, look, we all know our clients are actually quite busy, and just to provide them with an overview of the current projects that are currently active, utilising the traffic light system like Michael has spoken about, but also kind of identifying any critical events that need to occur in the next quarter and projects to commence. Look, we find that this is actually a useful reporting tool that our clients can actually present to the CEO or CFO, just to provide them with an overview of the health of the overall portfolio, and it also identifies the target outcomes that need to be achieved between now or 12 or 24 months out for the portfolio.
And I think it's just to reiterate that this is the monthly portfolio report. It's specifically designed to the audience that we have in mind. It's the monthly ones. We would like to have the CFO or one of the senior executive team. We'll get onto this a bit later, but we also have biannual ones in which the audience is entirely senior management. But in addition to this, a number of our clients like to have weekly catch-ups or fortnightly catch-ups, which is a little less formal. It's with the operational, the property guys, or the whoever looks after the portfolio, and that is where the nitty-gritty is discussed. This is an overview to provide executive or management overview, and just to get the direction, and it's designed to get decisions taken.
Yeah, that's right. And it's also used to provide assurance
Yes.
that the point of contact that nothing's actually being missed or overlooked also.
And besides insurance, what it does is it also highlights exceptions. So this one was particularly chosen because you can see there's 3 red dots. It does is it highlights that there are 3 current leasing activities, so to speak, stay or go, which are red in terms of timing currently with the client. Now, the reason I make that point is that very often property issues, and you folk will be well aware of this, get lost within a client organisation because there's so many parties that have a part to play. And so what this does, the routine in highlighting something slipping, it makes sure that disparate parties get to the point quickly and accurately.
Cool, thanks, John. Just on to the next slide, number 3 or item 3 of the solution is the actions and the transactions. So in conjunction with 1 and 2, which Michael has spoken about, the establishment phase, with this ensures that all the data records are updated, and as per each lease or each, call it freehold or license or event, and each and every transaction is actually validated by us and by our client against this performance indicator, which Michael will talk about shortly. And this also ensures that the leases and the portfolio is actually kind of well aligned with the business's objectives and requirements, both current and future requirements.
Thanks, Ken. You'll recall earlier I mentioned that that we look at a suite of standard clauses that are predetermined for an optimal lease structure. It's based entirely upon what the business objectives are, and the leases are these suite of clauses are designed to reflect and optimise the functionality of the business. The screenshot here illustrates our approach. The relevance and the importance of specific clauses will differ from client to client and business to business. For example, an NFP that is funded by annual grants will require maximum flexibility in lease terms, whereas a manufacturer with a heavy capital investment in plant will require a lengthy lease term in order to amortise its capital costs. So what this slide attempts to do is, what this optimisation index attempts to do is provide where the keeping in mind, the end in mind, is we're trying to, at the early stages, understand what are the important factors in a lease negotiation to focus on to ensure that there's maximum flexibility, that there's every opportunity for that site through its lease covenants to provide maximum opportunity for the business to achieve its objectives. Next slide.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Michael. So what we're going to do now is just dig a little bit deeper in terms of the five common nevers. We'll start off with the first one, never miss a critical date. And look, we've just highlighted a couple of key items for discussion. So we're starting off with the first one in terms of access and occupancy. So this actually relates to any early access provisions that may have been negotiated within the lease to allow the tenant to undertake any fit-out works or any construction works for within the tenancy without paying rent. And with the tenant and providing the tenant with the ability to occupy the premises upon completion. I guess the impact of this, if a business does actually miss this critical date in terms of the access date and occupancy, it could lead to the business undertaking any works within the after the lease commencement date, in which the business is not generating any income from the space during that time. So it's actually a missed opportunity, a missed date also. The second one, in terms of the expansion option, so this relates to any first rights or any expansion rights that have been negotiated within the agreement or lease. So the importance of this, if, for instance, if the business is on a growth trajectory, and there is a desire to take additional space within the building, within the adjoining floor or the adjoining suite, the landlord actually has to provide the business with the right to lease the space before they offer it to a client. And the impact of this is, from an operational view, if it does miss it and they do lease it to another client, the business will have to look for space elsewhere, even potentially in another site, which will be an operation nightmare. The next one, probably self-explanatory, but this almost ties in with the access and occupancy in terms of the lease commencement date. Again, you just want to make sure all your ducks in a row by their date to ensure the business is operational by their date, and the business can actually generate revenue from the premises from that date. Lease expiration date, again, it's just to keeping the end in mind, just to be aware of the critical date of their expiration to ensure, I guess the risk is if the business actually does miss the expiration date, you could actually be left out on the street.
Thanks, Ken. Look, in the interest of time, I'll keep this pretty brief. Lease renewal. Our earlier example of missing a lease renewal only emphasises the potential disastrous impacts in doing so. Keep in mind that a lease renewal also presents an opportunity for leverage, and a diligent portfolio approach will ensure the opportunity isn't missed either. Rent adjustment. This is particularly relevant if the lease contains a market rent review. The typical contemporary lease will contain key dates for notification of a new rent, dates for acceptance, and most importantly, the window in which to dispute the revised rental. If this is missed, the new rental may be deemed as being accepted. All in all, the message is to remain vigilant. If not, it could lead to a very costly mistake. Security deposits or bank guarantees, both are commitments that you are providing to the landlord as security in the unfortunate event of default. The landlord won't want them to be enduring and without any expiry date, of course. But we will always advise that there should be an expiry date, and the landlord must return the funds, or return the bank guarantee when it expires. In addition to that, particularly with bank guarantees, most trading banks in Australia nowadays are really reluctant to provide bank guarantees with no expiring dates. So it's really important to have a focus on the expiry date of bank guarantees and security deposits to ensure that you're not paying for something you don't have to provide. Incentives, an interesting one. Incentives will regularly have dates by which you must nominate to the landlord how you wish the incentive to be allocated. Incentive typically can be taken as a rental abatement over the initial term of the lease, as a rent-free up front, or as a contribution towards your fit-out. For example, it could become very, very problematic if you miss the date to allocate to nominate your allocation of the incentive, and the default position is the incentive will be allocated as a rent abatement, whereas you've just advised your CFO that the incentive can be allocated towards your new $3 million fit-out. That's a conversation I wouldn't want to have. So it's important to even stay on top of the incentives and the dates, the critical dates at the early stages of, and even prior to your occupancy. Termination option. As John suggested, many NFPs have defined periods of funding, 1, 2, 3 years. A well-negotiated lease for an NFP will often have should have a termination provision or an option which is aligned to that particular event. So conversely, in order to maximise your position, to maximise the incentives, to provide bargaining power with the landlord, and to provide security of tenure, a longer lease is desirable, so it conflicts. So it's important that to maximise your opportunity in terms of your leverage, you want to have a longer term, but in order for there to be a provision within the lease to align to your funding, you want to have a termination option. If you miss that, it could be very, very costly and indeed unfunded. Next slide, please, and Ken.
Yeah, cool, Michael. What we might do, might just throw it to the attendees and ask them for some feedback if they know of anyone or any organisations that have actually missed a critical date, whether it be an option term, expansion term, or even a missed rent adjustment.
Looks like nobody's got some friends who've missed anything here, Ken.
I've got a friend who missed the opportunity to dispute a market review, and that's where I was drawing that analysis from earlier on, is that this friend, Melbourne-based, so it is a real friend, missed the opportunity. It was a CBD building, and the landlord just dug his heels in and said, "You didn't give me the relevant notification. The market review stands, and you'll commence paying upon the relevant date."
Yeah, we had a new retail client, and in a shopping centre, they missed their option to renew, and the landlord really wanted a different client in the premises, and essentially they had the loss of the historic goodwill of trading in that premises,
yeah.
And plus the cost of relocation and so on. But somebody else was able to come in and to leverage the goodwill that they had created. So very important.
And I think, you know, just extrapolating the importance of being on top of things and knowing when things finish and when they're due. I know of a situation where there was a number of bank guarantees. This was probably 10, 15 years ago. Number of bank guarantees, no expiry dates. just floating around in the abyss. That they hadn't been called back in. The landlord was just sitting on them, probably in his fireproof safe. But despite the fact that he never drew upon them, they had no expiry date, and they were still being charged interest or the relevant costs associated with the bank guarantees. Now, when you've got, let's say, 100 bank guarantees out, it adds up. I mean, I know the cost of a bank guarantee on a site-by-site case is not terribly much, but when you've got 100 of them floating around unchecked, it adds up.
Yeah, Michael, that's a good example. I think we know of a case where there was a dispute in the make good provision at the end of the lease, and because it was an open-ended security deposit or bank guarantee, the landlord was actually using it as leverage to drive the outcome that was favourable for him.
One of the reasons why sometimes critical dates get missed, I'm referring to options in particular, is that the tenant can get into a negotiation with the landlord. You're trying to get to a result. In other words, you're trying to restructure the lease as opposed to exercise the option. And if the landlord is not really that keen on having the tenant there, the negotiations just get deferred and dragged out. And eventually, just by slippage and by oversight, the option gets missed. And in some instances, it can be from the landlord side. It can be tactical.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. But equally, the tenant also has to be tactical, and that's why you start these conversations well in advance. Again, we spoke about this last week, and I questioned Jeffrey about whether landlords are willing to deal with you 24 months out of your lease expiry. The answer is yes, unless they want you gone.
Sorry, I missed the hand up. Christine, I think you had a question or possibly an example.
Well, actually, John, as I had my hand up, you started talking about what I was going to mention, which was we did commence negotiations to renew within the required time frame, prior to the required time frame. But yeah, slippages, there's several investors involved, and negotiations have been ongoing. We wanted to change the option to renew from a 5-year term to a 2-year term because of COVID-19. And it's just been back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And consequently, we missed the option and came in one day and there was a sign out the front saying for lease. So, this is ongoing at the moment. It's interesting times.
Well, that's an excellent example. I mean, I'll leave it to Michael and Ken to comment, but that's exactly what happens. It's a very tactical, it's an area of conflict of interest, you know, the tenant and the landlords have different interests. So
That's a very interesting one as well, because I wonder if technically they're terminating the lease, which you're not allowed to do in COVID-19. Just a question. A question to a question.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I think we should have a chat with Christine about that. And I think that's because there are these all sorts of provisions and even, you know, there's even, I think you need to have a chat with that. That's a very interesting situation.
That's simply a nasty landlord. That's why we don't work for them.
I think it is. I mean, clearly it's there to put the pressure on us. I think negotiating with them. We're still talking to them.
Yeah.
But I think it's just their way of putting the pressure on us to sort of come round to their way of thinking.
It's bully boy tactics.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Anyway, interesting.
We're going to look for somewhere else to go.
Well, maybe call their bluff.
While lots of people are working from home, if they gave us 30 days to get out, I think we could cope at this point in time.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Next one, Ken. You're kicking off, aren't you?
Yep. So the next one, just going back onto our 5 nevers, never overpay or never pay too much. So in terms of the commencing effective rental, just to make sure the rent that's been agreed is reflective of the rent that you're actually being invoiced. Look, for those of you who don't know what the term effective rental is, it's the rent after the deduction of the value of the incentive. So typically what's noted on the lease is either, some people call it the face rent, or the headline rent, and the effective rent is actually the true rent that's actually being paid. In terms of the effective rental options, so typically what we try and negotiate for our clients is to make sure any market rent review provisions in the option term is a true reflective of a market rent, whereby it has regard to incentives and the rent can rise or fall. So that ensures the tenant is not overpaying. Look, in some cases, there are cases where the landlord will propose a ratchet clause, which means rent cannot decrease, and for the rent to be based off a face rent with no incentives. Just third point, annual increases. What landlords typically try and do is base any increases off the face rental. What we typically try and negotiate is for the rents any increases to be, whether it's CPI or fixed, to be based off the true effective rental. So the actual rent that is actually being payable by the tenant. And the next one, just to ensure that the business actually does receive a copy of the outgoings budget, to ensure there are no other hidden costs that the landlord is actually kind of seeking or recovering from the tenant. Sorry, Michael, you're on mute.
Michael,
Sorry, I had a cough earlier, so I forgot to turn myself back on. Look, just following on from Ken's comments about the outgoings, annual increases and outgoings also always need to be carefully reviewed, just to ensure that the outgoings are, one, and firstly, reasonable, and second, that they're in line with the lease definitions of outgoings. We briefly described a situation earlier in one of our case studies, which highlighted the need for vigilance. You will find that most landlords, and we specifically will focus on this as part of the upfront lease negotiations, keeping the end in mind, of course, is that most contemporary leases will have the ability for outgoings each year to be audited. So that means that the landlord will give you an estimate of the annual outgoings at the beginning of the financial year, and at the end of the financial year they'll be audited and reconciled, and there'll be an unders and overs. So in other words, if you've overpaid throughout the course of the year, you'll be refunded. Unfortunately, the converse applies that if you've underpaid, you have to provide a top up. Maintenance and improvements, again, often the contentious area of leases. What is the responsibility of ongoing maintenance? Is the cost captured within the definition of outgoings? Is it capital? Is it structural? All those sorts of considerations. An interesting case came up recently with one of our clients, a national client. They've got a major office in suburban Adelaide, and a new outgoing popped up on their monthly invoice, and which was quite coincidental because they previously complained to me to have a quick look at their lease for them because their hot water service wasn't working particularly well over the weekends. So I said, look, it's definitely a requirement of the landlord to maintain services to the building, which includes a whole range of things, including air conditioning and hot water service. Now, the air conditioning is covered by a separate clause to say that if you use air conditioning outside of normal business hours, that you have to pay an additional charge, and that's commonly accepted, and that's the common approach. What these landlords had decided to do, quite a well-known institutional landlord, had decided that they would also link the hot water service to the air conditioning regime. That is, outside of office hours, outside of core business hours, including weekends, tenants must pay for hot water, and it's an after-hours hot water. So we quickly reviewed the lease. It's an older lease back in the early 2000s, and there was a very clear responsibility on the landlord to maintain the hot water services with nothing negating it, such as the air conditioning clause. Very quickly, that invoice charge disappeared, and they are now got hot water service over the weekend. Moving on. Make good. Again, a very contentious thing. Keep the end in mind is what we will always emphasise. Scope it up right up front in the early stages of your lease. But notwithstanding that, at the end of your lease and you do vacate, negotiate. Get quotes, understand what your position is. Negotiate a position to leave certain items behind that may add value, supplementary air conditioning, kitchens, take that off the scope to reduce your exposure to make good. An interesting one is excess space or too little space. It's quite obvious that if you've got excess space, you're paying too much, and that presents an opportunity to you. Do you sublease? Do you assign the lease, or do you use it as an opportunity to negotiate the landlord with an early exit of the site? Too little space, conversely, can also cost you too much. If you all of a sudden find that you've grown and you need to find some additional space, it may be smaller, you may pay a higher rate per square metre, but you may also have to go to a separate building and you may have to duplicate, or you probably will have to duplicate a whole range of things. So you lose the economy of scale with a larger premise. So,
yeah, thanks, Michael. Just a question.
Yeah,
sorry, you go, Michael. No, you go. Yep.
Okay, well, I was just going to say, is there any feedback from the guys on the line that they've had instances of overpayment that they've been able to remedy?
I don't see any hands up or any comment, but I'm sure that there are. I'm conscious of time as well. So
Yes.
Go on.
Yeah. Next slide. So this is the penultimate one of our nevers. Never miss an opportunity, and we've dealt with a lot of this earlier on. And in the interest of time, I'll be quite quick. Never miss an opportunity to restructure before expiry. And Christine, you've touched upon that, where you've attempted to do that. It's often overlooked. An impending lease expiry does present an opportunity for leverage, particularly if there's no options for further renewal, and you've proven to be a good tenant in the past. To sublease excess space, again, we touched on that just a minute ago. If you're underutilising your space, you can contract into your own premises and sublet a portion, thereby reducing your exposure to ongoing costs, operational costs. Similarly, you can consolidate and assign. You may have multiple business units across a number of premises in different locations. COVID has emphasised to us that we have had an ability to be agile and mobile, and perhaps we can consolidate business units into a smaller space, leaving redundant premises that we could assign to another party. Ken, I think you're going to go on.
No, thanks, Michael. Look, the same principles apply with the consolidation and consolidation and assign, but I guess the difference with the sublease is, look, if the business does require the space back at a point in time, the sublease is probably a better arrangement in terms of providing the business with flexibility to take that space back at an agreed point in time. The other opportunity I think we touched on earlier is just to secure an expansion right. So again, if the business is on a growth trajectory, just want to make sure that they don't actually miss the opportunity to expand into the adjoining tenancy or adjoining floor. In terms of your workspace efficiency, again, going back to Michael's comment with COVID and consolidation, this is a hot topic for a number of our clients at the moment in terms of trying to find the best workplace that fits in with COVID and post-COVID. And overall, just to make sure that the business does actually get maximum leverage from any opportunity that is actually identified.
So what problems does portfolio optimization address? So we've addressed the five nevers. Never agree to a bad lease, never miss a critical date, never pay too much, never miss an opportunity, and always be compliant with your lease. So it is that, plus the additional focuses on the areas of portfolio management. There's too much space, we just touched on that. Too little space, we just touched on that. Underutilization of space, and that reflects your densities, and are you using the space smart enough? Is there an opportunity to introduce some agile working? Can you consolidate? All those considerations. So I admit it is slightly challenging with the social distancing restrictions, Is capital tied up unnecessarily? And this is particularly relevant to a freehold portfolio. Is it underutilised? Is there an opportunity to dispose of that and redirect capital into core business? Lost revenue opportunities, again, with a larger portfolio, particularly with land or even with underutilised space in office buildings. There's opportunities to sublease or assign or introduce a third party that can take some of those obligations off your shoulders. Inflated real estate costs. This is the diligent approach to portfolio management, is that to ensure that your cost. An example is the NFP missing out on rental council rate rebates and $95,000 over however long. MPV of that is approaching $1 million, I'd suggest. So just emphasises the need for an optimal approach to ensure that your business is functioning at its optimum levels. Next slide, or John.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to. Is that the last slide?
So just, yeah, I think this is just the last slide.
I think I'll have to, because we've gone over. Is that okay?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
That's fine.
Sorry about that. If I
No,
can,
we're enjoying it so much, John, we lost track of time. I apologise for that.
sorry about that, Frank. Just a couple of wrap-up comments. Is we have module 7 and 8 looking ahead. 7 and 8 next week. Module 7 is commercial tenants. What commercial tenants need to know: what to ask, who to ask, and when to seek advice. Actually, quite a thoughtful session. And then the last session, which I would hope that you'd feel free to send some questions through, or particular situations you're dealing with, because you've got the right to get some consultancy during this course as well, is COVID-19 impacts on your leases. Christine's already highlighted, it's got a COVID connotation to it, but specific situations you're dealing with, we're always bound by confidentiality. It's part of our obligation. But specific situations you're dealing with, COVID, send us your feedback, send us your queries, and we'll try our best to incorporate those either through individual dialogue or in the general session itself. I remind you that we do have the complimentary FAQ this afternoon focused on the office and industrial sectors, and that is at 3:30 this afternoon. It's easily registerable by through our website. Deals with COVID-19 impacts on your lease and your workplace. And we had some great material come through overnight from our US colleagues on negotiation and portfolio optimization, and which we will extract and post those in the client portal. Sorry we went a few minutes over. I do apologize for that. Thanks very much to Ken and to Michael, and look forward to hearing from you. And any queries, let us have them. Any feedback, let us have it. Thank you very much, folk. Have a good day further.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.